The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Ashford Palace, casting long shadows across the marble floors where Lady Catherine stood waiting. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the sealed envelope that would change everything. After months of careful investigation and sleepless nights, she had finally gathered the evidence that would expose the truth about the royal succession. Catherine had always been the dutiful daughter-in-law, marrying into the Ashford royal family with hopes of bringing fresh perspective to the ancient monarchy. Her husband, Prince William, was second in line to the throne, behind his older sister, Princess Alexandra. But what Catherine had discovered in the dusty archives of the royal library would shake the very foundations of the kingdom. The secret she uncovered dated back 30 years, to the birth of Princess Alexandra herself. Hidden among forgotten documents, Catherine found medical records and witness testimonies that suggested Alexandra was not the biological daughter of King Charles Edward. The implications were staggering. If true, it meant William was the rightful heir, and everything the kingdom believed about their future queen was built on lies. Catherine's discovery began innocently enough. While researching family genealogy for a charity project, she noticed discrepancies in the royal medical records. Dates didn't align, and there were unexplained gaps in documentation around the time of Alexandra's birth. Her curiosity piqued. Catherine began digging deeper, using her position as a royal family member to access restricted archives. What she found was a carefully constructed cover-up. Hospital records showed that Queen Isabella had suffered complications during what was supposed to be Alexandra's birth. The official story claimed the princess was born healthy after a difficult labor, but medical notes told a different tale. They spoke of a stillborn child and desperate attempts to save the royal line. The truth, as Catherine pieced it together, was heartbreaking. Queen Isabella and King Charles Edward had lost their first child during birth. Faced with the political implications of having no heir, they had secretly adopted a newborn girl from a noble family in crisis. The adoption was so well hidden that even the palace staff believed Alexandra was their biological daughter. For 30 years, this secret had remained buried. Alexandra had grown up believing she was the legitimate princess, preparing her entire life to rule the kingdom. She was beloved by the people, respected by world leaders, and had dedicated herself completely to her royal duties. The revelation that she was adopted would not only destroy her personally, but could throw the entire kingdom into constitutional crisis. Catherine spent weeks wrestling with what to do with this information. Every instinct told her to destroy the evidence and pretend she had never found it. Alexandra was a good person and an excellent future queen. But Catherine also knew that the truth had a way of surfacing, and if these secrets came out later, the damage could be even worse. The weight of the decision consumed her. She found herself studying Alexandra during family gatherings, looking for any sign that she might suspect the truth about her origins. But the princess carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her place in the world. Her resemblance to King Charles Edward was striking enough that no one had ever doubted their relationship, though Catherine now realized it was likely coincidental. As days turned into weeks, Catherine's behavior began to change. She became withdrawn during family dinners, lost in thought during public appearances, and struggled to sleep at night. Her husband, William, noticed her distress, but attributed it to the pressures of royal life. He had no idea that his wife was grappling with information that could make him king. The burden of the secret was taking its toll on Catherine's health and relationships. She found herself avoiding Alexandra, unable to look her in the eye knowing what she knew. During a recent charity gala, Catherine had nearly broken down when Alexandra gave a heartfelt speech about carrying on the family legacy and honoring her father's reign. Catherine realized she could not carry this burden alone. She needed counsel, but choosing the wrong confidant could be disastrous. The information was too sensitive to share with friends or staff, and she wasn't ready to tell William until she had decided what to do. Her only option was to approach King Charles Edward himself. The decision to confront the king was terrifying. Catherine had always maintained a respectful but distant relationship with her father-in-law. He was a formidable man, shaped by decades of rule and accustomed to having his authority unquestioned. But if anyone deserved to know that his secret was no longer safe, it was him. Catherine requested a private audience with the king, claiming she needed to discuss a sensitive family matter. The request was unusual, but not unprecedented. Royal family members occasionally sought private counsel from the monarch on personal issues. King Charles Edward agreed to see her in his private study, away from the ever-present palace staff and security detail. As Catherine walked through the palace corridors toward the king's study, her mind raced with possible scenarios. Would he deny everything? Would he be angry that she had uncovered the truth? Would he try to silence her to protect the secret? Each step felt heavier than the last as she approached the ornate doors that led to one of the most powerful men in the world. The king's study was a testament to centuries of royal history. Ancient portraits lined the walls, depicting generations of monarchs who had ruled the kingdom. Leather-bound books filled towering shelves, and the massive oak desk bore the weight of countless important decisions. King Charles Edward sat behind that desk, his piercing blue eyes studying Catherine as she entered. Catherine had rehearsed this moment dozens of times, but facing the king in person made her carefully planned words evaporate. She stood before him, the envelope containing the evidence feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds in her hands. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of unspoken truths and the potential for earth-shattering revelations. Finally, Catherine found her voice and began to speak, knowing that once the words were out, there would be no turning back. King Charles Edward's face remained impassive as Catherine presented the evidence she had discovered. She laid out each document methodically, explaining how she had found the discrepancies and what they revealed about Princess Alexandra's true origins. The king listened without interruption, his weathered hands folded on the desk before him, his expression giving nothing away. When Catherine finished her presentation, the study fell silent except for the ticking of an antique grandfather clock in the corner. The king rose from his chair and walked to the tall window that overlooked the palace gardens where Alexandra could be seen playing with her young nephews. For long moments, he watched his daughter, the woman he had raised and loved as his own, completely unaware that her entire identity was being discussed behind closed doors. Finally, King Charles Edward turned back to Catherine, and for the first time in decades, she saw vulnerability in his eyes. The mask of royal composure slipped, revealing a father who had carried an impossible burden for 30 years. He moved to a hidden panel on the wall behind his bookshelf and retrieved a small leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. The journal contained the full truth, written in the king's own hand during those desperate days 30 years ago. He told Catherine the complete story, his voice heavy with emotion he rarely showed. Queen Isabella had indeed lost their first child during a traumatic birth that nearly claimed her life as well. The kingdom was in political turmoil, with neighboring nations watching for any sign of weakness in the royal line. The opportunity to adopt Alexandra had come through Lady Margaret Thornfield, a trusted friend of the royal family. Margaret's own daughter had died in childbirth, leaving behind a newborn girl with no family to claim her. In their grief and desperation, the king and queen had seen it as a sign for providence. They could save this orphan child while securing their kingdom's future. The adoption was arranged in complete secrecy, with only 3 people knowing the truth: the king, queen, and Lady Margaret. All medical records were altered, witnesses were sworn to absolute secrecy, and elaborate measures were taken to ensure no one would ever question Alexandra's legitimacy. Even the palace staff believed they were witnessing the royal couple's biological child. King Charles Edward explained how they had agonized over the decision for weeks. They knew they were building Alexandra's entire life on a foundation of lies, but they also believed they were giving her the best possible future while protecting their kingdom from chaos. Queen Isabella, who had struggled with her inability to provide an heir, threw herself into mothering Alexandra with fierce devotion. As Alexandra grew, she exceeded every expectation. She was intelligent, compassionate, and naturally suited for royal duties. The king and queen came to see her not as an adopted child, but as their true daughter in every way that mattered. The secret became easier to keep as years passed, and Alexandra proved herself worthy of the crown she would inherit. The king revealed that Queen Isabella had wanted to tell Alexandra the truth several times over the years, particularly during difficult moments when their daughter struggled with the weight of royal expectations. But each time, they decided that the truth would only bring pain without serving any useful purpose. Alexandra was already their daughter in every meaningful way, and revealing her adoption would only create unnecessary turmoil. Lady Margaret Thornfield had died 10 years earlier, taking one of the only remaining links to the truth with her to the grave. The king had thought the secret was safely buried forever, until Catherine's investigation had uncovered what decades of palace security could not hide. Catherine listened to this revelation with growing understanding of the impossible position the royal family had been in. She could see the genuine love King Charles Edward had for Alexandra, and how the weight of this secret had shaped every decision he made regarding the succession. But she also understood the constitutional implications of what she had discovered. The king asked Catherine what she intended to do with the information. His question was not threatening, but rather the inquiry of a father worried about his daughter's future. Catherine admitted she was uncertain. Part of her wanted to destroy the evidence and pretend she had never found it, but another part worried about the consequences if the truth ever emerged from other sources. King Charles Edward shared Catherine's concerns about the potential fallout. If the adoption was revealed, it would not only devastate Alexandra personally, but could throw the entire succession into question. Legal scholars would debate whether an adopted child could inherit the throne under ancient laws that had never anticipated such a situation. Foreign governments might question the legitimacy of treaties signed with the assumption that Alexandra would be queen. The conversation between Catherine and the king stretched for hours as they explored every possible ramification of the secret. They discussed Alexandra's character, her fitness to rule, and whether bloodline mattered more than preparation and dedication. Both agreed that Alexandra would make an excellent queen, regardless of her biological origins. The king revealed another crucial detail that Catherine had not discovered in her research. When Queen Isabella was dying 5 years earlier, she had made him promise to tell Alexandra the truth someday. She believed their daughter deserved to know her real history, even if it was painful. The king had struggled with that deathbed promise ever since, torn between honoring his wife's wishes and protecting Alexandra from unnecessary pain. Catherine realized that her discovery had forced a decision that the king had been postponing for years. The evidence she had uncovered meant that the secret was no longer completely secure. Other researchers might eventually find the same discrepancies, or advances in genealogical testing might reveal the truth. The question was no longer whether to tell Alexandra, but when and how. The king asked Catherine to give him time to consider all options before making any decisions about revealing the truth. He needed to think about how to approach Alexandra with information that would shatter her understanding of her own identity. He also needed to consider the constitutional and political ramifications of changing the line of succession. Catherine agreed to keep the secret while the king decided how to proceed, but she made it clear that she could not carry this burden indefinitely. The knowledge was affecting her relationship with Alexandra and her ability to function normally within the royal family. Something would have to be done soon, whether that meant telling Alexandra the truth or finding another solution. As their meeting concluded, King Charles Edward thanked Catherine for bringing the matter to him directly rather than acting on her own or involving others. He recognized that she could have used the information for personal gain, ensuring her husband's claim to the throne, but instead had chosen to seek guidance from him. Her actions demonstrated the kind of character that made her a valuable member of the royal family. The king walked Catherine to the door of his study, and as she left, both of them knew that everything had changed. The secret that had been safely buried for 30 years was now exposed, and decisions would have to be made that could alter the course of the kingdom's history. The weight of that responsibility rested heavily on both of their shoulders as they prepared to navigate the difficult days ahead. 3 weeks had passed since Catherine's revelation to King Charles Edward, and the tension within the palace walls had become almost unbearable. The king had spent sleepless nights wrestling with his decision, consulting ancient constitutional law, and considering every possible outcome. Meanwhile, Catherine struggled to maintain normalcy around Alexandra, who had begun to notice the strange atmosphere that seemed to follow her everywhere. Princess Alexandra was not naive to palace politics. She had spent her entire life learning to read the subtle signs of court intrigue, the carefully controlled expressions, and the weight of unspoken words. Something was troubling her family, and she suspected it concerned her directly. During recent family dinners, conversations would halt when she entered the room, and Catherine seemed unable to meet her eyes. The situation reached a breaking point during the annual Harvest Festival celebration. As the royal family prepared to address the gathered crowds, King Charles Edward made his decision. He could no longer bear the weight of the secret, and he realized that Alexandra deserved to hear the truth from him rather than discover it through rumor or accident. The promise he had made to Queen Isabella on her deathbed could no longer be ignored. That evening, after the public festivities had concluded and the palace had settled into quiet, the king requested a private meeting with Alexandra in the same study where he had spoken with Catherine weeks before. Alexandra arrived dressed in the emerald gown she had worn for the festival, still radiant from the day's success, but puzzled by the urgent summons. King Charles Edward had rehearsed this conversation countless times, but facing his beloved daughter made every carefully chosen word feel inadequate. He began by telling Alexandra how much she meant to him and Queen Isabella, how proud they had always been of the woman she had become. But as he spoke, Alexandra's intuition told her that something devastating was coming. The king's voice trembled as he revealed the truth about her birth and adoption. He explained the circumstances that had led to their decision 30 years ago, the desperate need for an heir, and the miraculous opportunity that had brought Alexandra into their lives. Each word felt like a physical blow to Alexandra, who listened in stunned silence as her entire understanding of herself crumbled. Alexandra's initial reaction was disbelief. She demanded to see the evidence, to understand how such an enormous lie could have been maintained for her entire life. The king showed her the documents Catherine had discovered, along with his own journal entries from those tumultuous early days. The proof was overwhelming and undeniable. As the reality sank in, Alexandra experienced a cascade of emotions. Betrayal mixed with confusion, anger intertwined with grief for parents she had never known. She thought of all the time she had stood before mirrors looking for family resemblances, all the occasions when she had proudly spoken of carrying on her father's legacy, all the moments when her identity as the true princess had defined her sense of purpose. The revelation also brought unexpected relief in some ways. Alexandra had always felt different from her brother William, had sometimes struggled with aspects of royal protocol that seemed to come naturally to him. She had attributed these differences to personality, but now wondered if they might stem from her different origins. The pieces of a puzzle she had never known existed began falling into place. King Charles Edward watched his daughter process this earth-shattering information, ready to comfort her, but uncertain how to bridge the chasm that had suddenly opened between them. Alexandra asked about her biological parents, desperate to understand where she had come from. The king shared what little he knew about the young woman who had died giving birth to her, but the information was frustratingly incomplete. Alexandra's next questions cut to the heart of the constitutional crisis they all faced. What did this revelation mean for her position as heir to the throne? Was her entire life's preparation meaningless? Would she be forced to step aside in favor of William, who was now the only legitimate biological heir? The legal and political implications were staggering and unclear. The king assured Alexandra that no decisions about succession would be made hastily. Ancient laws regarding adoption and inheritance had never been tested in such circumstances. constitutional scholars would need to research precedents, and Parliament might need to clarify the legal framework. But regardless of what the law ultimately decided, Alexandra would always be his daughter and a member of the royal family. Alexandra's mind raced through decades of interactions, searching for clues she might have missed. She remembered Queen Isabella's deathbed words about family secrets and truth, which had seemed cryptic at the time, but now made painful sense. She thought about Lady Margaret Thornfield, who had always shown her special attention, but whose significance she had never understood. The conversation stretched deep into the night as Alexandra grappled with questions of identity, legitimacy, and purpose. She had built her entire sense of self around being the future queen, dedicating every aspect of her life to that role. Now she faced the possibility that everything she had worked toward might be based on a lie, even though it was a lie told with love and good intentions. King Charles Edward tried to help Alexandra understand the context of their decision 30 years ago. The kingdom had been facing external threats and internal instability. The royal line needed to continue, and they had genuinely believed they were acting in everyone's best interests, including hers. They had given her a life of privilege and purpose that her biological parents never could have provided. But Alexandra struggled with a fundamental deception that had shaped her existence. How many people in the palace knew the truth? How many conversations about her future had been conducted with full knowledge of her adopted status while she remained ignorant? The sense of betrayal was overwhelming, even though she understood the protective intentions behind the secret. As dawn approached, King Charles Edward made a crucial decision. He would convene a private council consisting of trusted constitutional experts and senior palace officials to explore the legal options regarding succession. Alexandra would be included in these discussions, able to participate in determining her own future rather than having decisions made about her without her input. The king also revealed that Catherine had been instrumental in bringing this truth to light, though she had struggled with the knowledge and eventually felt compelled to share it rather than let it remain hidden. Alexandra's relationship with her sister-in-law would inevitably be complicated by this revelation, though she recognized that Catherine had acted with integrity in an impossible situation. Alexandra requested time alone to process everything she had learned. She needed space to grieve the loss of her assumed identity while trying to understand who she really was beneath the royal titles and expectations. The king granted her request, but not before embracing her and reaffirming his love regardless of biology or bloodlines. As Alexandra left the study that morning, she carried with her the weight of truth that had been hidden for 3 decades. Her world had fundamentally changed overnight, and she faced an uncertain future where everything she had believed about herself was now in question. The palace that had always been her home suddenly felt foreign, filled with memories that had been recontextualized by devastating revelations. The next phase of this crisis would require careful navigation of constitutional law, family relationships, and public expectations. Alexandra would need to decide whether to fight for her right to inherit the throne or step aside gracefully to avoid a constitutional crisis. But first, she would need time to rediscover who she was beyond the royal identity that had defined her entire existence. The constitutional crisis that followed Alexandra's revelation consumed the palace for months. Legal experts pored over centuries-old documents, searching for precedents that might guide the unprecedented situation. Public speculation grew as Alexandra's reduced appearances at official functions fueled rumors about her health and the stability of the royal family. During this turbulent period, the relationship between Alexandra and Catherine became the most complex dynamic within the royal household. Alexandra understood intellectually that Catherine had acted with integrity by bringing the truth to light, but emotionally she struggled with resentment toward the woman who had shattered her world. Catherine, meanwhile, was racked with guilt about the pain her discovery had caused, even though she knew revealing the truth had been the right thing to do. The breaking point came during a private family gathering 6 months after the revelation. The constitutional experts had concluded that while ancient laws were ambiguous about adoption, Parliament would need to pass new legislation to clarify Alexandra's status. Until then, her position as heir remained legally uncertain, creating an unprecedented constitutional limbo. As the family discussed the latest legal developments over dinner, tensions that had been simmering for months finally erupted. Her brother William had been supportive, but was clearly conflicted about his own potential claim to the throne. Catherine, who had been quietly enduring months of awkward interactions and guilty feelings, finally reached her emotional breaking point. She could see how the revelation was tearing the family apart and destroying Alexandra's sense of self. In a moment of raw emotion, she turned to King Charles Edward and whispered something that would change everything. Catherine's words, spoken quietly but heard by everyone in the room, cut through months of legal debates and constitutional analysis. Your Majesty, perhaps it's time to consider that love and dedication matter more than bloodlines. Alexandra has spent 30 years proving she deserves the throne through her actions, not her birth. The simple truth of Catherine's statement hung in the air like a revelation. She continued, her voice growing stronger as she found her courage. She spoke about watching Alexandra's unwavering commitment to the kingdom, her natural leadership abilities, and her deep understanding of royal responsibilities. Catherine argued that these qualities, developed over 3 decades of preparation, were more valuable than genetic connections to previous monarchs. Alexandra, who had been prepared to argue with Catherine about anything, found herself speechless at this unexpected defense. She had assumed that Catherine, as William's wife, would naturally support his claim to the throne. Instead, Catherine was advocating for Alexandra's right to rule based on merit rather than blood. King Charles Edward listened carefully as Catherine articulated what many in the room had been thinking, but had been afraid to express. The kingdom needed a leader who understood its people and its challenges, someone who had dedicated their entire life to serving the crown. Alexandra possessed these qualities regardless of her biological origins. Catherine went on to share her observations about Alexandra's character during their years as sisters-in-law. She spoke of Alexandra's midnight visits to children's hospitals, her tireless work on behalf of veterans, and her innovative approaches to modernizing the monarchy while respecting its traditions. These were not the actions of someone playing a role, but of someone who genuinely embodied the spirit of royal service. The emotional weight of Catherine's defense proved too much for Alexandra, who had been holding back tears for months. As Catherine's words sank in, Alexandra realized that she had gained something unexpected from this ordeal, absolute certainty about who she was beyond titles and bloodlines. She was someone who had chosen, day after day for 30 years, to serve her people with dedication and love. Through her tears, Alexandra found her voice to respond to Catherine's support. She acknowledged the pain and confusion of the past months, but also recognized that learning the truth about her origins had ultimately freed her from the weight of living up to a genetic legacy. She could now choose to be queen based on her own merits and convictions rather than inherited obligation. King Charles Edward watched this exchange between his daughter and daughter-in-law with growing clarity about the path forward. He announced his decision to formally recommend that Parliament pass legislation confirming Alexandra's position as heir, regardless of her adoption. He would argue that her 30 years of preparation and proven dedication made her uniquely qualified to rule. William, who had been quietly wrestling with his own feelings about succession, finally spoke up to support his sister. He had never wanted to be king and had watched Alexandra excel in the role of heir apparent for their entire lives. Her adoption did not change his respect for her abilities or his belief that she was the right person to lead the kingdom. The family's united front marked a turning point in the crisis. Instead of being torn apart by the revelation of long-held secrets, they had been brought closer together through honest communication and mutual support. Catherine's courage in speaking up had catalyzed a conversation that had been needed for months. Over the following weeks, King Charles Edward worked with parliamentary leaders to draft legislation that would modernize succession laws to explicitly include adopted children. The process generated public debate about the nature of leadership and whether bloodline or character mattered more in determining fitness to rule. Public opinion polls showed surprising support for Alexandra's continued role as heir. The people had watched her grow up in the public eye and had witnessed her dedication to royal duties. Many felt that her adoption, rather than disqualifying her, demonstrated the royal family's capacity for love and inclusion. Alexandra used this period to reconnect with her sense of purpose. She embarked on a speaking tour across the kingdom, discussing her vision for the monarchy's future and her commitment to serving all citizens regardless of their backgrounds. Her openness about her own journey of self-discovery resonated with people from all walks of life. The constitutional crisis also prompted Alexandra to search for information about her biological family. Through careful investigation, she learned that her birth mother had been a young woman of good character who had died tragically young. This knowledge helped Alexandra make peace with her origins while maintaining her love for the parents who had raised her. Catherine and Alexandra's relationship evolved into one of genuine sisterhood forged through shared adversity. Catherine's defense of Alexandra during that crucial family dinner had demonstrated loyalty that transcended political considerations. Alexandra came to see Catherine not as the messenger who had destroyed her world, but as the ally who had helped her rebuild it on a foundation of truth. As the new succession legislation moved through Parliament, the royal family prepared for Alexandra's eventual coronation with renewed confidence. The crisis had tested their bonds and ultimately strengthened them. Alexandra would not inherit the throne simply because she was born to it, but because she had proven through decades of service that she deserved it. The kingdom emerged from the constitutional crisis with a modernized understanding of leadership and legacy. Alexandra's story became a symbol of how character and commitment could transcend circumstances of birth. When she eventually took the throne, it would be with the full knowledge that she had earned her position through her own choices and actions. The whispered conversation between Catherine and King Charles Edward had indeed brought tears to Alexandra's eyes, but they were tears of gratitude rather than sorrow. Through the pain of discovering the truth about her origins, she had found something more valuable: absolute certainty about who she was and why she deserved to lead her people into the future.